Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Agentic AI, Can You Afford to Put the Cart Before the Horse? I'm Trevor Churchley. I'm Head of Customer Success at Potenza and Model Citizen. Over the last past few years, we've had hundreds of conversations with finance and tech leaders about AI. And here's what we keep hearing. We need to do something with AI, but we're not quite sure where to start. Our board is asking about it. Our competitors are talking about it. But honestly, we're worried about getting it wrong. And you're right to be cautious, because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most AI projects fail, and they fail fast. Not because of technology, but because of what comes before it. So today, you're going to hear from three people who have been in the trenches. Lance Rubin from Model Citizen, and Mark Vigers and Danusha Muthukumarana from Potenza. They're going to show you why data foundations matter more than algorithms, what actually causes AI failures, and what practical steps you can take right now to get this right. So today, there's no vendor pitches, no magical thinking, just honest guidance from people who have seen what works and what doesn't. But before I hand you over to Lance Rubin, today's webinar will go on for around 50 minutes before we'll pause for a Q&A session. So please feel free to write your comments in the QA box that's been provided. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to hand you over to Lance Rubin. Lance?
Thanks, Trevor, and welcome everyone. Look, there's a lot of hype in this space, and I think we want to really make it simple so you can understand where we're going with all of it. So, as Trevor said, 95% failure rate, that's fact. There was a study done, and everywhere you turn, there's a lot of challenges with AI. And so it's not the tech that's the problem per se. It has its vagaries, but the important thing is the clarity and the foundations are just not there. And without that, you build anything on sand, and of course, you know the answer. So what is agentic AI? Because obviously, like with everything AI, there's all these new acronyms. So we thought we'd define it really simply so that you could think about that. So it's a specific independent operating type of AI. It's a subset of AI. It's got goals and actions that are almost like human-like in terms of the way that it executes. So it kind of almost tricks you to think we've got human intelligence, right? And it does it in an automated manner. So it's like back and forth, and it shows how it's thinking, and you get the impression that it's actually doing something that's extremely valuable, way more valuable than actually what it is. So, and it can adapt to those changes just like humans can. So it's very confusing when you look at it the first time and you get blown away and you get this sort of rush of, oh, wow, this is doing things. But then when you start to actually look at what it's done and how it's done it, reality starts to set in. You realize it's not kind of doing exactly what you wanted. And there's some issues with that. And that's got nothing to do with the tech. It's actually got to do with the foundations that it's using. And we're going to go through that today. So the good thing is that because it's a reactive technology and you can go back and forth, it can, I guess, adjust and pivot based on your prompts. And I guess this is where prompt engineering and how you use the AI is an important part. So, the ability to have digital agents adapt to certain circumstances is useful, and you act within context and within the context window. And it's, not just following the rules, you actually have to provide it some additional context and structure. And that's where I guess the important part of actually the user is part of that process to use these tools. Look, we always love to talk about models and data and decisions, but ultimately it comes down to providing clarity and confidence. And unstructured, messy models is just chaotic, and you just don't get the value from bad data. You've got to have a really, really well-structured environment, provided clarity, because the less structured it is, and the more the hallucinations creep in. And of course, maybe hallucinations are not too bad or too such a problem in sort of if you're trying to create a story or a narrative or something. But when you're talking finance, governance, risk, hallucinations are shocking. And it's kind of like if you you had a chisel and a hammer and you had a piece of wood. To the ordinary person, you can create huge damage, but to the craft marksman who actually understands how to use those tools properly, you can create a beautiful wooden statue or wooden anything really, but you have to know how to use the tools right. And that's no different to agentic AI. So these are the watch-outs. Really, really important. You need to be careful when you're using these technologies, not similar to when you're using a hammer and a chisel. the misalignment, they will diverge from time to time between what the technology is doing and to what the human intent is or what the human wants to achieve. It also can fake that. So, often it's, are you sure that you've given me the right answer? You can ask an agentic AI LLM and it'll be absolutely confident that it is, and it'll fake alignment, it'll fake a whole bunch of things, and it'll be generative where there's data gaps. So data quality is a challenge. And therefore, there's flawed reasoning. And Danush is going to go into golden layer and those sort of data structures, and that's important. It wants to retain power and all knowing, all present, never wrong. So you've got to be careful and escalation and just it knows and you don't. So it can be quite a challenge when using agentic on those levels. And of course, as I said, overconfidence driven by hallucinations. It doesn't have real world context. It doesn't understand, all the other moving parts in a certain process. So that's where you can have scope drift, you can get hallucinations, and of course, ultimately, this is a quite a fun little cartoon, but it's reality, right? Something amazing can do well, but something very basic can get wrong. So I don't know. I don't think I'd be trusting doctors with AI in too much of a rush with the current tech, because you may find an appendix missing in the place that you didn't think you had one. So what I'm very passionate about is financial modeling and providing clarity through structured models. And even if it's just bringing the business case and understanding the investment, because there's big investment in AI. What is the actual business case? How are we going to look at that? What are the costs involved? Give clarity, give confidence, even model some basic scenarios and scenario planning and options and risks. What is the biggest risk? Well, I don't know. 95%, 94% of projects failing is a pretty big risk, if you ask me. And I think that's a very, very small percentage that actually get the benefit. So you've got to be understanding that and be careful. How do we get to a baseline of value as opposed to shoot for the stars? And I think that's where we often talk about starting small, start with a particular process and then expand beyond then, rather than trying to solve everything straight off the bat. Like all things, financial models are driven by really good data. AI models, LLMs, are driven by good data. Unstructured data, more messy, more chaos, less clarity, and of course, less confidence. So, data is what fuels decisioning engines. And so, ultimately, you have to understand the data and the foundations to get the best of that. So, I'm going to pass on to Danusha, my colleague, to talk about tech infrastructure and architecture, because this is a really, really important part of the data journey, which is the foundation for AI and in particular, of course, agentic AI. Danisha, over to you.
Thank you, Lance. Absolutely. So once you have models, now Lance brought in a nice conversation around models. And then the next question is, what data fuels them? So we all get excited about building models, GPTs, copilots, could be automation frameworks, but have we thought about the fuel of it, right? So it's the fuel. If the fuel is dirty and if it's incomplete, if it's inconsistent, even the most advanced model will misfire. So this is actually what we are trying to focus on, where the hallucinations come from and where the poor predictions and compliance failure begins is there. So when you say garbage in, garbage out, it isn't cliche, it's reality. So ask yourself, can your organization truly trust its data? If not, that is the first bottleneck to solve before any AI promise can be materialized. So that brings us to the foundation that decides whether AI succeeds or fails, the golden layer. So let's look at what's in the golden layer. Just picture your data architecture as a 3-layered pyramid, right? So you've got bronze, which is the raw, messy, straight from source layer. So that's your first set of data. And then you have silver, which is partially cleaned, semi-usable. So that's the transitioning layer of data. Then we arrive at gold. So basically harmonized, validated, business ready. So that golden layer is where truth lives. It's what every model should rely on for consistency. In every failed AI project that we've reviewed, including several Azure Copilot deployments, the missing piece was this layer. Without it, models made confident but wrong decisions. So as you saw in the picture previously shown by Lance, with it properly functioning, accuracy, traceability, and trust fall into place. So now even with a strong foundation, we still need boundaries. So that's the next step of this whole architectural conversation. And that's where sandboxing becomes very crucial. If you look at now, think of sandboxing as creating a safe playground for your AI models. So they can explore, test, learn, but without touching live production or breaching compliance. So this is very important in your transitioning phase from production to live. Right? So we use 3 layers of control here. So first one being architecture guardrails. So we're looking at containment, throttling, and separation of this environment, and also then what it can do. You got continuous monitoring also going there. So it can detect a bit of drift, bias, or errors early. So this is very important in your AI journey. So because once the guardrails are in place, scaling responsibly becomes not only possible, but predictable. So we're looking at readiness to being responsible. That's AI at scale. So how does that work? So many organizations stumble here. They jump straight from pilot to scale without governance. And responsible AI is about oversight, compliance, and also alignment. Oversight ensures human validation. And then, of course, compliance keeps every decision explainable. So the logic behind it. You can give a meaning to it, the approach that you took to arrive at the decision. And alignment connects AI outcomes directly to business value. And where, for example, if you look at oversight ensures human validation and compliance keep every decision explainable. So alignment connects AI outcomes directly to business value. So this is very important. And then we are moving into the next slide. Now, 3 steps we can look at. How do you get ready for agentic AI? So first one, assess your maturity. Know your current quality, accessibility, and governance gaps. So that is very important step. And this is the step that in most cases we actually forget to execute. And then align every AI initiative to measurable business goals. If it doesn't tie to revenue, efficiency, or risk reduction, then we have a problem. It's noise. We have to go back. And then build the golden layer, which is your single version of truth. And then roll out in phases, as we discussed, augmented AI, which are humans assisting, and then supervised, and then we are moving into autonomous. So we have to do this deliberately, and you will build sustainable competitive advantage and also responsibly. So to move on to the next set of slides, I will invite Mark, who's my colleague, to take you in terms of how we operationally arrange this.
Thank you very much, Danusha. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, great, thank you. So how does one live with a tool like AI in its current form in production? And one of the things I've heard said about it, and it's certainly been our experience to date, is that the current generation of AI technology needs to be treated like an inexperienced employee, very fast one, but a one that will produce outputs for you, but its work constantly needs to be checked. Because if it is uncertain of an answer, it may well hallucinate one. But even if it's not a hallucination, its interpretation of the data that's underpinning the information or that it's using to come up with its insights can mislead it, because the current generation tech doesn't actually have comprehension. So that means that we've got to approach how we live with it in production in a completely different way if we don't want to see it taking us down paths that we didn't, that we never expected that we would find ourselves on. Next slide, please. So there's a variety of things, and where we start is pretty traditional. It's going to require hosting. We have to make appropriate decisions around a technical infrastructure and how we're going to manage that. Cloud-based, on-prem, all of these options are available with the present sorts of technologies that are being fielded. We also need to take into account with that selection where we're at from an organization in terms of our governance and our risk and our compliance elements. A lot of the cloud-based platforms, there's questions around data sovereignty that need to be taken into consideration. These systems require enormous back-end compute, and is that compute onshore? If it's not onshore, then there's going to have to be some limits for some organizations to the kind of information that it can be shared. But even generally for all organizations, they would need to understand that some of their key data may well be moving offshore, and what that means for them in terms of a data breach requirement and those sorts of things. So that needs to be an area that's very carefully considered at the outset of a project. What are the implications for an organization operationally? But then there's the question of what do we do with it in production? And I think there's two major facets to that. And that's really going back to my earlier point that it has to be monitored. And it has to be monitored with a degree of subject matter expertise. We've seen direct examples where an AI model is thrown at a set of data, and admittedly relatively unstructured data, where the information it was producing was exceedingly cogent. To the uneducated eye, it would look like data upon which you could rely, which is harking back to the points that Lance and Danusha was making, particularly Lance, that it will attempt to sound convincing because that is the nature of the way that it has been coded. However, looking at what it was saying with an educated eye, it was immediately obvious that it had dreamt some elements up of what it was projecting. And if one was going to rely on that information, you would be in some fairly serious trouble. So the major sort of, I'd say, production implementations we're seeing, certainly in larger organizations at this stage, they're using this technology in an advisory role, not in a deterministic role. See, one of the challenges with moving into this next phase with agentic AI is it's trying to move the technology into a more deterministic role, being able to give people insight and answers they can rely upon, but we're still in this transition phase. So every organization needs to look at how it's going to educate its people. So that's its organizational readiness. How's it going to communicate to its people how they should be using this information? And then also, how is it going to continuously monitor how this agent is behaving in production so that it can they can have some faith in what it's saying. Next, please. What are the consequences? And again, putting back into, why are so many of these projects failing? Probably the most important thing, I think, is when trust evaporates. Any technology platform implemented in any organization, the moment the people who are using it or using the outputs from it, forget whether it's AI, just anything, the moment they feel they can't rely on what it's telling them, they will bypass it. They will say, this is no longer giving me something that I can use in a meaningful way. I can't trust this, I can't rely on this. Therefore, once my trust is gone, I can't risk my credibility on using this. The hype in the industry is creating a lot of, over-promising. And if organizations have not set up appropriate test environments or sandbox environments to look at what changes in underlying data will mean, changes in underlying model will mean, to have a reasonable prediction of what they will do in production, again, you're going to have significant challenges. So next, please.
Sorry about that.
You're right, mate. It's all good. So what can we do to try to keep ourselves out of those sorts of pitfalls? It's probably, there's a temptation with the thought that is around the capability of this technology at the moment to throw it at the world and let it have at. And that's proving not a successful approach. What we're seeing is a successful approach is to pick a narrow use case, something that is understandable, definable, and where the outputs can be well monitored. And then once that is being used, have that regular monitoring. And the frequency of that's an operational question for an organization. And I think another thing, which is kind of like, IT implementation 101, is to build these systems so that if something changes in your model or your processing in production, you're able to get it back out relatively quickly. Because again, this is about maintaining faith, maintaining trust from the people in your organization that, what these tools are telling them is something that they can rely upon. Next, please. What can happen? What are the consequences for an organization? Wasting your money on a project, that's one thing. Compliance risks, that's another. But I actually think the biggest danger in all of this technology at the moment is it pretending that it can give definitive answers to questions, but those answers not being valid and not having adequate checks and putting an over-reliance on what the technology can do for organizations, and that's where they're seeing the failure. So I will hand back to my colleague Lance to wrap up for our last few slides, and then it looks like we'll have a reasonable amount of time for Q&A, so hopefully we get some interesting questions.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so I think hopefully everyone's got a good understanding of, I guess, the problem statement, some options and things to think about in terms of solutioning and how would you approach it and some of the foundations. But I think that Mark makes a really good point about when the rubber hits the road on this. And I think that's where that 94% failure rate comes to the front and the reality sets in, because there wasn't oversight set up front. There wasn't a proper understanding of compliance fully. When you talk compliance, it's not just this motherhood statement. It's actually really down at the granular level, at the, really the process level, in terms of, are you compliant with whatever legislation, whether it's, invoice payment plans or anything that you're applying the agentic AI to is going to have compliance relative to that environment. But more so for our people. I just don't think that we've thought about that enough. So the business alignment across all our different functions in an organization. I'm a big user of agentic AI tools within finance, and some of it is cool, some of it is a bit scary, and not all of it is correct. And so you have to sift through, as Mark says, having that subject matter expert to actually understand. Last week I ran a test on building a SaaS financial model, which is software as a service, for those who have not heard the acronym, a financial model with an income statement, a balance sheet, and cash flow. And so I had all the stuff ready and threw it at 5 different LLMs. And the results were not great. And so, really making sure that we understand what we're getting into is an important thing. So we've been working, and I've certainly been working in trying small specific use cases in pilots and testing AI solutions. And, there's lots of different elements in terms of where you could apply AI because of this agentic nature, that it almost seems like it can replicate human tasks. And of course, humans are all over our organization, and that's still a very important part of the process. This is not AI on its own. It needs to have the SME, the people involved. But how do you get people involved if they fear their jobs at risk? And I guess that's the enterprise rollout challenge, but of course also the governance challenge around, are people going to sabotage an AI project because they don't want it to implement and scale effectively? And have we thought about that? Have we thought about that as an organization? But have we thought about that as a country or a nation or a species? I just don't think we have. So we're kind of like, cart before the horse is not just a technology thing around we throwing AI and we don't have the data foundations. It's also a mindset thing around, have we actually thought about the human impacts to our people, to society? Because, these are the things that is also a little bit an afterthought. And therefore there's risk associated with projects. So you could have the best infrastructure, you could do exactly what we said, and ultimately culture could completely kibosh your project because your people just didn't sign up to it. Your people didn't understand what it meant for them and what the roles were going to be. And that's the challenge. We don't necessarily know exactly who's going to do what. But we have an obligation as the C-suite to really communicate these three things, right? We have to provide clarity and transparency on the AI, the process, and the outcomes. We have to tell people, this is what we're aiming for. This is the outcome we're trying to achieve. And if that means you're going to be doing less turning the handle on a process and more analysis and more collaboration with the business, or doing new things like monitoring and maintaining, to Mark's point, you're going to need you're going to need people and humans to monitor the AI processes. Now, is that something that someone would be happy to do or not? Well, that's for the individual to decide. But we have to help our teams get re-skilled. And so, the risks around agentic AI are vast. Whether it's people, process, the technology itself, or whatever, there's risks everywhere you look. And I think, that's why you have such a half failure rate, because, at every little turn, you've got to think about, the people, the process, the data, the structures, the technology itself, security, and all of these elements. And then, of course, cost. Cost does come into it. I don't think you should just think about cost on a project perspective. I think you need to think about a cost from a business holistic perspective. What's the long-term cost? What's the cost of removing people that then actually have really good client interactions, and how a client's going to feel talking to a bot or an AI agent, and see that you don't value that relationship? You've got to think of those costs as well, those hidden costs. So really, to start this process is an important thing to unpack: clarity, risks, and then costs. And we often do some of this work with clients through diagnostic processes because we understand these elements. And so if you wanted to start or at least understand this, like I said, modeling is an important part. We have to understand what's the business case around to start off with? What are the costs involved? What are we trying to achieve? Are we going to get better engagement from customers? What revenue is that going to return us? And therefore, what are the costs that we can invest to get a return on our investment? Once you've got that agreed, and there's alignment there, because I think people will oversell the dream and underdeliver on reality. And that's why you get that high 94% failure rate. But once you've got that approved, signed off, everyone's happy, I'd say you need to think about things like governance and other elements, which Danusha was talking to. But of course, the golden layer, that is the fundamental elements of getting the data well structured, so that when you do put the AI on the top, it's actually responsible, and it has the context, and it has the right information, the right foundations. But that's still not a guarantee, right? You still need to put and understand how you're going to work with the technology, how you're going to put SMEs in the right roles so that you can really rely on it. Before you start, you absolutely have to assess your data maturity. Put into place the golden layer, as Danusha was talking about, the single version of the truth. Align the AI initiatives to the business goals, and then roll it out in phases. So, augmenting it with current processes, then supervising it, and then moving on to agentic. Not just throwing agentic at the front, and as we say, cart before the horse, without getting some of those other foundation and those layers in place. So that's an important distinction to where we're going to go and what we have to do. Look, in summary, I think it's important that we can really understand what does cart before the horse actually mean. What are we doing, and what are the things that we've missed? We have a link, a QR code. You can share more information. There's a lot of stuff that I'm doing on the Future of Finance Fortnightly Finance Lab, where we're playing with these tools. We're working through a bunch of things. Potenza and Model Citizen work very closely together on projects, on data projects, and AI is becoming a big part of the data foundations to leveraging and using. If you want to, come along, join, just scan the QR code, or someone can put a link in the chat as well, which is there. You can click on that as well, which Trevor just did. And then ultimately we can, reach out, have a conversation, and see, because I think there's one thing that is for sure, is this train is not slowing down. The genie is out of the bottle, and it is going to go as far as it's going to go, and we're all on this wild ride together. But I'd rather be on a ride knowing that the foundation or the cart that I'm sitting in on that roller coaster ride is well built. I'd hate to be sitting in a cart that I have concerns that I can see through the seat into the ground and there's holes everywhere. I kind of feel like that's probably most people's data environment now, certainly the ones that we have been working with and building models for. It's not as straightforward. But thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time. We have gone through those slides reasonably quickly to give everyone time to ask questions. There's obviously a lot to unpack there. But Trevor, do we have anything coming through from people?
Yes, we do. Just to pause for a moment, that analogy of a scary roller coaster is giving me some goosebumps, actually. I don't think I want to get on your roller coaster, Lance. Thank you very much. We do have a question from Chris Jamison. Thank you so much for your question, Chris. His question is, I've been trying to teach myself AI modeling with well-structured data, but the lag on the more common tools paid means that it is a very slow process and riddled with errors, including Copilot, Excel Agent, GPT, and Claude. Are there any niche tools that you could use with better speed to enable faster iteration?
Yeah, Quinton, I think if you come along to our Future of Finance lab, we use a tool called Tab AI. You can go to the Model Citizen website as well. We've just run 2 sessions on that. Ultimately, it's really good. And when you say AI for modeling, I assume if you just confirm, are you talking financial modeling or data modeling or AI modeling as in LLM and predictive modeling? Because of course, all of those are slightly different things. But if you want to, on Friday's session, I took a SaaS financial model and I threw it at 5 LLMs. And yeah, it was slow, riddled with errors, not great. And that is 3-state. Exactly, that's where I thought you were going.
Chris, sorry, Lance. Chris, I just turned your microphone on, so if you can unmute yourself and chat.
How's it going?
Oh, great. Yeah, Chris. So on YouTube, actually, can someone just post the link to the YouTube video that I posted last night, perhaps from what I took a SaaS financial model assumption book and I threw it at those LLMs. And I've actually compared that to a model that I built. And I think the highest percentage completion rate was 29%. By the Excel agent mode. So that's Excel for web in agent mode with effectively, ChatGPT in the back end, because, Microsoft use ChatGPT, although they call it Copilot. I tried Anthropic, I tried a few other things. Yeah, it's problematic. And I think you need to really be astute at understanding. It's back to this whole discussion about the data and the foundations, because AI will not build you a very robust balancing 3-statement model. One of the hardest things for it to do actually is to actually balance the balance sheet and then build scenario management and build dashboards. So Tab AI is a better interface. It's an Excel add-in. It sits in Excel. And I guess if you watch our first session, the second session was recorded recently, but you can watch some of those. So anything else, Chris? Any other questions you might have?
No, but I agree completely. Excel Agent has certainly been the best one I've used. So I've built these models manually at a senior level. It just worries me seeing this technology in the wrong hands.
Just a little bit.
As you said, it'll confidently give you the answer, but unless you've sort of been through the rodeo before, like you won't spot that it's made a glaring mistake. And I find I have limited time to practice this in the evening. And that's why I get quite frustrated with the slow speeds, because you're waiting 7-8 minutes, it gets it wrong, you put in a different prompt to try fix it, and it's just a slow learning process.
Well, it's running as fast as you can into a brick wall, right? That's kind of what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, Mark, you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, Chris, Lance has had more direct hands-on experience with this, like building these things, but I've sort of been on the receiving end. And the first thing that I've seen is that the moment the system has access to any data outside of your core data set and brings that in, it will start coming up with the craziest things. I saw something that was done. It was a bunch of some property reporting, and it was then giving projections on what some properties were potentially worth. And I've asked the question of the person who put the model in front of me, okay, how did it come up with that number? Because I know intrinsically that number is just foolish. It's a crazy number, but it was adequately within the bounds of reason that somebody who didn't have intimate knowledge of that particular scenario, they could have tried to take that quite literally to the bank. They could have said, hey, this thing's going to be worth this, and this is what this model says. And of course, the moment anybody actually dug into it, it wasn't going to be telling you anything meaningful. And that's a bit like the poor lawyer that got disbarred in the US for using an LLM to write a brief, and when they found that out and it wasn't disclosed, it was fairly catastrophic consequences for that professional. And that's then when I was talking about where the trust collapses. The moment people think, hang on, I'm putting my job on the line here. If I trust this, and put something forward, and then it turns out to be rubbish. So I think it's as much about the data, Chris, as it is about what the model itself is doing. It's being able to constrain it and understand what it's thinking about.
Thanks, guys. That's very helpful. I'll try to tab AI and look at the YouTube channel, but it's been really helpful to understand the importance of data structure and governance as well. That's all been great to hear.
Chris, I'll give you an example where it does work and give that distinction. So, and it's a little bit, you'll see it on the recording from last week, but basically we had an audit. We completed the audit of 8 legal entities, 5 Australian, 3 US entities. They all on Xero. Xeros are not a multi-entity system and consolidation system. So the auditors wanted me to give them a reconciliation between their audited trial balance, which they manually downloaded each 8 entities into a spreadsheet, compared to the current live Xero. Because we, like all audits, so there's adjustments, there's discussions and all the rest. And we had a live Xero file. So, I had to then pull all of those. Now we have our own tech called Excel Cloud. It pulled it all nicely into a nice table, structured for across all 8 entities, also did the multi-currency conversion. And then now I had to manually compare that to the auditor's Excel. And that's a lot of, and you would not think that that's something that you would throw at AI because it's so deterministic. But what I did is I used Tab AI and I actually completed one reconciliation for one trial balance for one entity. And then I asked it to look at what I did and replicate it. And so that task for reconciling 8 trial balances for 30 June year end across P&L and balance sheet, obviously because the whole full trial balance, would have taken a human 2 to 3 days to do, I reckon, if you were doing nothing else, right? You were doing nothing else and you did that line by line. It took me 3.5 hours to do that because I was going back and forth with Tab AI, and Tab AI does use Claude Sonnet 4.5, but you can change the models as well. Whatever tool you're going to use, you need to, I guess it's good to understand the model behind the tool, so that you can change it if you need to. And I guess that's one of the concerns I have with something like Excel's Copilot, Microsoft's Copilot, is you have less control over that in an Excel sense. But it did a really good job. And I asked it to do a validation and check sheet. And that was one of my nuggets from Friday. So I think this stuff's going to get better, but we have to make sure we don't get caught up in the hype. And I think that's the problem. We're in this hype cycle still. Even though, it's now been 2 and a bit years since ChatGPT first came to market, I think there's still a lot of hype around what it can actually do to drive business benefits. And I think this is the issue that people are facing. And now it's like to your point, Chris, I'm now getting frustrated and it's taking so long. And in the end, I've got to spend so much time checking. So now not only do I need to then do the exercise myself, because now you've wasted however many hours trying to get the tool to do it. And it's just not, so for model building, I'd say, okay to just test it to see if it's getting any closer, but I wouldn't waste my time on building models with AI. It's just not going to get it right for now, the current generation.
Yeah, you can absolutely see the potential, and like the efficiency gains that are going to come in the future are going to be phenomenal. But like at the moment, it's good for basic tasks at the moment, I find.
Correct.
But like, as soon as the task gets any way complicated, it just starts getting confused.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks everybody, by the way. Thanks.
We've got a practical scenario for you for the panel. A finance team starts using ChatGPT to build models or analyze data. What's the risk and how should leadership respond?
So they're using AI. I'll take that one because it's finance to use AI to build models and for data analysis. Yeah, like I said to Chris, I wouldn't be using AI for model building. I'd be really worried because unless you have a really good structure, I guess it depends on what type of model as well. If it's just a really basic model, to Chris's point, it's probably okay. But if it's a really complex budget forecast, balance sheet, cash flow model, 3-way model, no, it's not there. So I'd actually have a session with the team and educate them on the technology. It's good to support them and get them inspired to try the technology. So I wouldn't, sort of kill the idea. I'd really, and we do workshops you can invite them to. It's for free. It's every fortnight. It's 1 hour. And there's a registration link that, which if you can just post the registration link, it's also on the other page. But ultimately, it's education. So my first thing would be, what's the governance and the process around using these tools to start off with? And then okay, we can use them. Okay, that's all good. Now let's understand how do we educate and support people, and then understand the security and what are we going to do, what are we not going to do. But I think all roles are going to have significant boosts in productivity, but people need to reskill. We need to know what are the pitfalls. And if you don't know what you don't know, and you're relying entirely on AI, well, you're in a very, very dangerous place.
Thanks, Lance. We have a question from Jeff. Thank you for your question, Jeff. With the Deloitte government report with AI errors that has blown up, we all have heard about that one. Where is the major flaw? Oversight in that someone should have checked every reference, or would it be in the original data, not the golden layer? Who'd like to answer that one, gents?
That's a me or Danusha. Maybe.
Go, Mark.
I think Danusha is probably going to have some really good bits and pieces, but I might start just with a little bit in terms of from the data point of view.
Absolutely.
So
go ahead, Mark.
Where was the flaw? The answer is it could be at either point. And there was another question. I think the person's jumped off. So they were sort of asking, what were the strategies for pulling together this golden layer and this trusted information? And this is a work we do a great deal of. To take we deal with a lot of organizations. They're very data rich, but the data is in various places. It's scattered. It's all meaningful. But the key is the relationships between the data. So the key difference between, I guess, a lot of the information in an organization and what we would call the golden layer is the golden layer. First of all, the data has been cleansed. So there's input controls around making sure that there's never invalid data in a particular context. You've got something that's meant to be a number, and all of a sudden there's weird characters have been introduced, because you throw that sort of thing into an analysis engine, and it can be difficult enough to understand what an SQL database will do with that, let alone what an AI tool is likely to do once you throw some information in a context where it wasn't expecting it or didn't understand it. So one is to cleanse the data, but then as far as the AI tool is concerned, is then also to be able to define the relationships between the data. And that's even harder to be able to define that really well and understand how the AI tool can interpret it. So my personal view at the moment is that because none of the tools that are available to us as the general consumers of this stuff at the moment have actual comprehension. That's when we're moving into artificial general intelligence, and we could have a long conversation about how scary that might become. But because the thing that you've got to remember is they have no comprehension of what they're looking at. They're just trying to interpret and define relationships and pull things out of the information without fully understanding it. So where the problem occurred, like in that particular circumstance, again, it'd be interesting to have that insight. They're probably not going to share that publicly. But I wouldn't be surprised if it all started to fall apart because something went wrong with as simple as data cleansing. So that's right at the raw base information. There was invalid data in certain fields, in certain cells of a particular field. Or it could also happen at the higher level where the AI engine started to imagine relationships in information that weren't actually there. And so without a lot more detailed information about what they were actually doing, it's probably impossible to know. That'd be my 10 cents worth. What are your thoughts, Mr. Aaron?
Mark, I just checked it out. So this is basically the 2025 report Deloitte submitted to the Australian government. And later, they identified that there's contents in the report where it's referring to non-existent, judgments to, legal conversations to and the rest. So pretty much, and in a corrected report, they actually, mentioned, according to Business Insider, that Deloitte has used ChatGPT-4 to create part of the content. So now this is where actually the problem that we were discussing. Now we're talking about an enterprise use case of agentic AI and also in a public domain. Now, this is exactly, hallucination example of ChatGPT, and you're using it to generate content that you're going to include in a report to the government. Now, had they done it in a way that The agentic AI is connected to their data repository, which is well scoped and guardrails put in, and you only have accurate data in it, then the hallucination would have been avoided. That's number one. And even if you're using public AI tools such as ChatGPT, one of the other things that you can look at is this is also an example of over-reliance of AI, for drafting and for content generation. We need to be careful in terms of to guide it and also validate the references that it throws out in the output, right? And so that also leads to lack of proper verification and the reference and the fact checks of the content that agentic AI, public agentic AI, is throwing out, and also the traceability component. And from a government point of view, I don't know how the legislations have been, right now rolled out, like to what extent, enabling to what extent public AI tools can be used to generate content around it. So this is where it actually had really gone wrong. So linking it to what we've been discussing, this is exactly a good example. Thank you actually for asking, Jeff. Now, enterprise usage of AI, you need to be very clear what is the set of data that you're going to expose to your agent, so it will provide concise information or correct information within compliance realms, within the correct and actual references. So thanks. I hope I answered the question.
Nice, man.
Also, panel members, Norman has also posted a comment. Deloitte's issue was that the report went through 5 layers of QA, but no one actually reviewed the report. They all simply signed it off. Too much reliance on the AI tool used. I think that's a pretty fair comment too. Thank you, Norman. It was quite a interesting situation.
Trevor, I might just add something which I often repeat,
yes,
and I think it's an important thing, is you can outsource the task to AI, but you can never outsource your responsibility for what comes out. Right? Yeah. And that's the point. You're going to use these things, that's all fine and good, and do it, but you cannot hand over responsibility for the results, particularly if you're a big 4 firm around these things. So I think we're going to see more and more of this. I think we're going to see a lot that don't hit the media, but of course this is a shocker.
And Lance, on that, just from a compliance point of view, one of the things that I think will be a serious challenge for quite a number of organizations will be their insurance cover. And yes, what does it mean, the way they're integrating these tools? And of course, the way that's the first manifestations of that are going to be when someone's got a claim against them and they had over reliance on the AI tool. And I don't have any direct insight on this yet, but if I was in the risk and compliance department of a large organization, I'd be thinking, I wonder what my insurer's reaction is going to be to this. And are they going to try to use it as a foundation for denying the claim? Well,
I think it's an easy one, isn't it? Gen AI did it. Isn't that the defense? Gen AI did it. It wasn't my fault.
Go get your money from Gen AI.
We've got another question for our panel members. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions you hear about AI in finance? Biggest misconceptions?
I might take that one for finance. Biggest misconception, I think people think that it's because it does things that looks good, it's accurate. So I think that's, because it does something and it seems intelligent, it means it implies accuracy. And I think that's probably the biggest thing. And Chris, we're going back and forth on this a little bit, but I think it's, the biggest misconception is AI is a calculation model. Right now, they're LLMs, they're large language models. They're trying to find patterns of language and they try to speak in a convincing way. And yes, they're getting better, but still, I think if you remember some of the first ChatGPT, when it first came out, I think it was 3.2 or something, and we were at 5, it was absolutely convinced on basic maths problems that it was getting wrong. So it's slightly better now, but I think it's still a challenge, and you need to give very strong guardrails. So yeah, I think people are just saying, oh, well, I can get it can write. I use it for helping me with technical accounting papers and researching accounting standards and applying business conditions to an accounting standard. It was really good at summarizing the accounting standard. How does it apply? What I need to think about, in sort of like a colleague back and forth in sort of manner. It can be quite useful. but I'm not using it to do actual calculations and actual numbers. And I think that's where you got to be careful. When you start to doing actual numbers and particularly forecasting, that's the misconception. People are saying, oh, you can use AI to build models, you can use AI to do forecasting. I think that's a massive risk.
So,
I
Lance,
don't know what my colleagues thought. Yeah.
we've got someone who's put their hand up and would like to jump
Norman's
on.
Norman's got his hand up. Yes.
And Norman,
Hey, Norman.
I've enabled your mic. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi guys. I think Lance, you kind of hit the nail on the head there on what I was going to say as well. I mean, something we've all got to remember, that AI, at the end of the day, it's just a series of ones and zeros, right? I think in terms of language match and language interpretation, I think that's probably where AI is today. If it's not yet an accountant, it's not yet a financial controller, and it's not yet a CFO. So we've got to be careful how we promote the use of AI internally within enterprise and organizations, because I saw a note the other day that somebody mentioned that, they're in a meeting room there was 20 CFOs in the room, and everybody was afraid that they weren't, on the AI bus yet. And everybody thinks that everybody else is doing it, but in reality, nobody is yet, because AI is not yet mature enough to, eventually, no doubt it will get there. But as you'd mentioned earlier, Lance, ChatGPT has been around for like 2 years or something now. 2 years is such a minuscule fraction of time, and for it to get to for any AI tool to get to where ideally we need it to be, and which everybody thinks it is, which is to replace humans, I don't think it can ever get there.
I hope you're right, Norman.
I hope you're
So
right
do
as
I.
well, Norman. I think
that's what I'm saying, and I'm sticking to my guns.
Oh, no. You're right, Norman. But what I'd say is that at least start to work on the data and the process foundations to do, just because that's good business practice, and more so than about AI. I think even if we want to have a snowball's hope in applying this tech, we're never going to, in the current data processes and the way that we run our processes. And so there's lots to learn on the basic fundamentals of data engineering before AI. And I think that's kind of the thing that we're trying to say is, like, if you're going to spend money in your data environment,
fixing
your
the
gold
data
layer and your infrastructure, because that will
100%.
actually give you real business returns, and it'll actually help improve the process. And ultimately down the track, when this technology is ready, and I think you're right, I think what we need is quantum computing, so you don't go to ones and zeros. You've now got much more powerful processing, because you need that to solve really, really complex algorithms for AI. And I guess, as Mark said, God help us all when that does happen, but we're probably about a decade away, but who knows? But yeah, no, thanks, Norman. That's a really good point.
All right, we're nearly out of time. So I think panel members, I'd like to each ask you a question and have maybe a 30-second response. Can you each tell me what's the one thing you would like everyone to remember from today's session? Let's start with Lance.
Thanks, Trevor. I think just get the basics right. Let's just focus on the basics. Let's get data processes right, the data environment, more, deterministic understanding of process, and get the data environment correct, particularly for finance and accounting. Do you have a financial model? Are you doing forecasting and budgeting? Can we look forward, not back? None of that needs AI. That just needs dedicated effort on, data and financial modeling, not AI modeling.
Okay. Danusha, how about you?
Yep, I'll bring in terms of an architectural perspective. We know AI still does not have infinite knowledge about everything around us. So based on the enterprise usage scenario, we need to make sure that we contained the data, and we structure the data, and we also bring in the golden layer to have consistency going in and accuracy going in. So that's pretty much what my idea about it is.
Fantastic. And how about you, Mark?
I would say start small, use it with a vision to driving productivity and efficiency, and don't bet the farm on what it tells you. That'd be my 3 bullet point takeaway I'd like to leave people with today.
Fantastic. You know what they say in these webinars, an hour just flies by, right? But it's been a great discussion. I'd like to thank Lance Rubin. I'd like to thank Danusha Muthkumarana. I'd like to thank Mark Vigers for your time today, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your insights. Yes, we didn't talk about the sexy hype of AI today. We spoke about the boring data fundamentals, but I think, you know, that's an hour well spent to be able to get it right to start with. To hopefully save you all from a hopeful, a possible future AI disaster. So thank you so much to our presenters. Thank you very much to everyone that's attended today. It's great to see so many of you come along. As mentioned, hopefully you'll also get an email from us with some URLs and some links to some tools and some resources that will hopefully help you and your teams and your businesses and you personally on your AI journey. So thanks again for coming along. Please stay focused on our socials for both Potenza and also for Model Citizen. We do push out quite a lot of really good content to educate and delight. And we'd love you to follow us as we would love to follow you. So thank you so much for your time today. Have a wonderful, happy Wednesday and the rest of a great week. And hopefully we'll be chatting again real soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Yep.